Hello, I'm Cap Daniels. Today we will continue reading I Am Gypsy, Chapter 3, Thursday. I would never know how Tommy died, but knowing I would spend my life in the same water that held his remains made me feel like he was still part of me. Tommy's death made me consider my day, my life would end. Would I be run down by a freighter on the open ocean? Would I perish in a fire? Would I open up and take enough of the ocean inside me that I would fall to the murky depths, never to see the sun or feel the wind again? I learned that dying isn't the worst thing that can happen. Sometimes living is worse. Living, after all, is dying slowly. Some thrive for decades and then succumb to age or illness and drift quietly into darkness. Others, like Tommy, live fearlessly and ferociously until life is suddenly ripped from their bodies far too early and with far too much grief poured onto their families. The worst, though, is dying a little more every day in the wake of unthinkable tragedy. That is what I learned from my first family. I was 2 decades distant from the day I first met my family. Tina was perhaps 2 decades and 2 years from the day she first drew a breath. And Thomas and Terry were, I suppose, twice that distant from their birth. Time isn't a concept I've ever understood. The moon endlessly circles us, and we endlessly circle the sun. I wonder if it ever ends. My family came and brought things of every sort. They brought clothes, food, books, and even a guitar. I'd seen guitars and even heard the sound they make. Sometimes they were pleasant, but only sometimes. Maybe everyone has a guitar somewhere. Maybe. Thomas filled my water tanks with fresh water and my diesel tank with clean fuel. We were going, and I was happy. I wanted to go since the first breeze I ever felt. I'd missed going. As time passed and as my family grew older, and especially since Tommy had gone on to wherever people go after this. My shore power cord was disconnected and coiled and stowed away. My dock lines were brought aboard and also coiled and stowed. We weren't just going, we were going away. The ocean and sky welcomed us. The wind blew and the sea was calm. I was free. My sails were stretched and full. My hull was slicing through the blue ocean and dolphins were dancing with me. I was happy on the outside, but the inside wasn't the same. It wasn't the same without Tommy. Terry didn't care for me the way she had before. She still cleaned me, but she never sang, and her touch was hard. She read a Bible and cried every night. Her once flawless skin drew up as if the life inside was slowly escaping her face, leaving her withered and dried. Perhaps it was the tears. Perhaps she needed the tears to stay inside her. Perhaps. Tina tried to pretend she was happy. She let her hair fly in the wind, and she still stared into the heavens at night, but she no longer counted the stars. She just stared, as if she wished she could be among the stars, or perhaps with Tommy. Perhaps. Thomas busied himself with meaningless tasks. I had so many parts that needed his attention and love, but he created chores that had no value and no benefit to him or me. It was as if he just needed to be doing something with his hands. He didn't whisper to Terry that he loved her. He no longer reached for her in the dark. He no longer told his daughter stories under the stars. Perhaps he felt he wasn't the man his wife needed, or the father his daughter had once adored, since Tommy had been taken. Perhaps. We sailed southward toward the sun and toward the imaginary line dividing the earth in half. It has a name, and I'll remember it in time. The waters warmed and the air thickened with heaviness, with humidity and energy. Great whales swam beneath my keel, and I saw things I never imagined. Fish of every shape, size, and color danced beneath me, and some even leapt from the water beside me as if they wanted to see my family. Tina played the guitar softly at night. It made a sad, mournful sound that must have been the pieces of her soul escaping through the guitar. She mindlessly fingered the strings as if the sadness of the song drove itself and dragged her hands along, forcing them to pluck out the pain of every note until sleep, merciful sleep, enraptured her body. She no longer lay in a ball, but her body reclined limply and awkwardly in restless slumber. She was no longer the child I had loved or the princess she pretended to be. Her eyes were empty and her smile was gone. But to me, she'd always be that beautiful little girl and that perfect princess. The sun filled the sky 6 times before I saw land again. I didn't think I'd be happy to stop going, but I was. Perhaps the sadness of my family and their emptiness had finally fallen upon me as well. The joy of the wind in my sails and the dolphins dancing at my bow grew shallow, and I felt alone. I couldn't understand how I could feel loneliness without actually being alone. Perhaps that's exactly what my family was feeling. Although they were still alive and together, they were distant from each other by fathoms, by oceans, by worlds. And I was but a material thing to them. I had lost the life I'd once held, and so had my family. Thomas tied me into a slip in a marina like I'd never seen. There were so many boats and so many people. So much was happening. I was overwhelmed. He connected my shore power, and I felt the electricity course through me, but I couldn't feel the love of my family. That was gone, and that was what I wanted to feel most of all. I was so far from home and still confused. Thomas and Terry stepped ashore with their bags in their arms and stared at me for a long time. Tina stood in my main salon with her arms wrapped around my mast and tears in her eyes. I'm going to miss you, Gypsy. Miss me? What are you talking about? Wait a minute. What's happening? I watched her climb the stairs and step through the companionway. She turned and closed my hatch before sliding her arm through the straps of her guitar case and stepping onto the dock. She didn't look back. None of them did. My family walked away and left me tied up in a marina, far from home, and they never looked back. The night came and the sounds were different. People were everywhere. Boats came and went, and the hordes of people kept coming, wave after wave. Some were happy and young, holding hands and singing. Some were drunk and alone in the crowd. Some were just as confused as I was, not knowing where they were or what happened next. It was chaos, and I was right in the middle of it. The darkness wore on until finally the people disappeared. A few remained, but they were quiet and still. I relaxed and thought about my family. Perhaps they'd come back soon. Perhaps not. The sun arose again and it got hot. A man with no shoes and no shirt and hair that looked like it was tied in knots hopped over my starboard lifeline and galloped down the stairs. He looked into my bilge and even opened the hatch to my diesel. Maybe he was there to remove the hot, noisy, stinky thing. No such luck. He checked the oil and coolant and tugged on the belts. He closed the hatch and flipped on my electronics. I never really knew what the electronics were for. People looked at them with great interest, especially when we were far from land, but I always found my way without looking at them. The man whistled incessantly. I don't think he was whistling any particular song, but he seemed content, even though his hair looked painfully knotted. Let's see what you can do, Gypsy girl. Gypsy girl? That's not my name. I'm Gypsy, just Gypsy. What I can do is go. I'll show you, young knothead, what Gypsy can do. The man started my engine, that blasted, useless engine, and backed me out of my slip. He forcefully turned my wheel hard over and blasted my rudder with a burst of water from the propeller, and I danced around sharply. Knothead wasted no time and had my sails unfurled in seconds. The noisy engine fell silent before we'd left the marina, and we were going. I was beginning to like Knothead. He let me do things I didn't know I could do. We heeled over 25 degrees and I buried my starboard tow rail in the water. I'd never done that before, but it felt good. I was going. I'd never gone like that, and I wondered just how fast I could really go. We started the tack. Equator. That's what the imaginary line around the middle of the earth is called, the equator. Anyway, we started the tack, turning my bow through the direction the wind was blowing, but Knothead didn't release my headsail sheet. He had left my windward sheet cleated off and let my headsail backwind across my foredeck. We were heaving to. I remembered that maneuver, but I hadn't done it since my sea trials the day I met my family. Heaving to is what a sailor does when he wants to stop me in the water without taking my sails down. My headsail tries to push me backward and my mainsail tries to push me forward. The two forces cancel each other out, and I end up parked in the water, drifting very slowly downwind. That particular maneuver comes in handy in a storm, or if a sailor needs to go pee or make a sandwich. Anyway, that's what we did. We hove to, and I liked it. Knothead knew how to sail. He walked around my deck, pulling and pushing on everything he could reach. He put his ear to my mast and listened. I have no idea what he was hoping to hear, but I loved that he was listening to me. You're a grand old girl, aren't you, Gypsy? Hey, he got my name right. You bet I'm a grand old girl. Knothead, what's going on with your hair, dude? My new friend rolled me out of the heave to and headed back toward the marina. I didn't want to go back. I wanted to go. I wanted to see what else Knothead could have me do. I wanted to show off a little for him. As we were sailing back, a boat that looked just like me sailed up beside us and slowly started passing us. I didn't like that at all. Anytime two sailboats are pointed in the same direction, that's a race. Come on, Knothead. You can't let them outrun us. You're better than that clown, even with your screwed up hair. I didn't know if he could hear me or if he was just thinking the same as me, but he leapt to his feet and began trimming my sails. He'd stare upward into my rigging for a while and then at the other boat. Then he'd trim a little more. Then he'd stare and listen. Finally, he had my sails trimmed to perfection, and we sailed past that other boat that was trying to look so much like me, overtaking her by at least half a knot. She was cute enough, I suppose, but I was faster. She chased us unsuccessfully all the way back to the marina, but Knothead and I were victorious. To my surprise, her sailor looked a lot like mine. His hair was screwed up too. It must have been something in the water, wherever I was. Knothead quickly tied me back into the slip and leapt to the dock. The other sailor came running down the dock toward him. I hoped they weren't going to fight, but I was pretty sure Knothead would win. They didn't fight. Instead, they shook hands, or what could have been considered shaking hands, but it looked more like some sort of ridiculous hand dance. When it was over, both sailors looked me over with great interest. I love her already, said Knothead. Yeah, man, I think she loves you too. She's sure fast. Did you get a good deal on her? Deal? What's he talking about? Yeah, a great deal. A family up north had her since she was new, and I bought her for pennies on the dollar. They were giving up sailing. I got no idea why anybody would quit sailing, but I'm glad Gypsy fell in my lap. Congrats, man. I'm happy for you, but I'll beat you next time out. Quit sailing? Bought her for pennies on the dollar? What is happening? What about my family?